Now let us start microeconomics with the LOS 13, which is demand and supply analysis. Here we are going to discuss various types of market, what are demand and supply curves, and how do we reach price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium using demand and supply curves, and what are various type of auctions and winning prices. Then we look at the concepts of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total surplus in demand and supply curve. Then we look at the various causes of imbalances in demand and supply and the role of government regulations and interventions on market, and finally various factors that affect the elasticity of demand. Now let us start with types of market. Broadly there are two kinds of market. One is factor market, another is goods market. What are the factors? Factors are inputs to an economy or to a company. For example, they could be land, labor, capital, which could be financial capital, or human capital, which is labor. Fourth could be raw material. So these are all factors. For example, bond market and security market, they are markets for financial capital. Labor market is for human capital, and there could be other markets from which we acquire these inputs. Another type of market is goods market, where we buy various kind of goods and services, shopping mall, retail show, legal services, financial services, etc. Now let us look at two very basic concepts of economics, demand and supply. Let us start with demand. So this is the demand function. QDX represent quantity demanded, and which is the function of various other factors. For example, price of commodity X, price of commodity Y, or maybe income of the consumer, and there could be similar other factors. So basically demand function represents buyer's behavior, how a price is influencing the consumer's purchasing decision. For example, if the price is high, consumer may not want to consume that product or services anymore, or he just want to reduce the quantity if the price is very high, and vice versa. So accordingly, the demand function can be portrayed as negatively sloped demand curve, which will be quantity demanded on x-axis and the price will be on the y-axis. We can see it is a downward sloping curve. For a lower price, the quantity is say Q1. So if you increase the price further, the quantity will come down. If price moves from P1 to P2, the quantity moves from Q1 to Q2. This is negatively sloped curve, representing an inverse relationship between price and the quantity. So if the price of good rises, consumer demand falls. This could be due to various reasons like availability of substitutes. If the price of one commodity is rising but there is some other substitute which is available, then consumer might just switch to another product. And similarly, if the price of good falls, then consumer demand might rise. They might want to consume more amount since it is available at a lesser price. So there is an inverse relationship between price and the demand, which is consumers are willing to buy the quantity. So this is the curve, price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, as we have seen. So in this curve, if the price is 5 unit, the consumer might want to consume 4 unit of product, and if the price say falls to 4, consumer might increase their consumption to 8. So one thing which we should be very careful in this case is demand curve is basically representing the effect of price on quantity demanded. It is not the other way around. Now let us observe the implication of this statement. There could be two reasons of demand changing. When the price of the product is changing and it is changing the demand, then we are moving on the demand curve. That is, quantity demanded is changing due to price, but the demand curve is same. But if there are other factors which are influencing the buying plans of the consumer, in that case the demand curve itself changes. In other words, we can say when the quantity of the good that people are planning to buy changes at each and every price, then there is new demand curve. So this is not responding to the price, there is some other underlying reason. Say earlier the demand curve was D1, now the demand curve is D2. So for every price P1, P2, P3, the quantity which was demanded earlier is now increased. So same price, now we have new quantities. Earlier say it was Q1, Q2, Q3, now it is Q4, Q5, Q6 because of the shift in the demand curve itself. Now we have a new demand curve, and the change is not because of price, it is because of some other factor. It could be price of the substitute, or it could be the changes in the preferences for that particular product, or the changes in income, etc. That gives us a new demand curve itself. While the response to the price keeps us on the same demand curve, it could be shifting leftwards or downward on the same curve. The quantity is changing with respect to price. That means there are two different things. One is quantity demanded. In this case, we are moving on demand curve. And the second case, there is change in demand itself. So there is a shift in the demand curve. So we need to understand the difference between these two concepts. Let us move to the next slide. We have seen that income is a shift factor of demand. That is, the change in the income of consumer will shift the demand curve itself. If there is an increase in income, the number of any product, for example the automobiles, demanded at each price will change. So the entire curve will shift rightwards if there is a rise in income. So for the same price, the consumer will be willing to consume more quantity of the product. So when the demand increases, the quantity that people plan to buy increases at all the prices. So the demand curve is shifting rightwards. And when the demand decreases, for example, if income has fallen for all the consumers, then demand curve shifts leftward and the quantity that people were planning to buy decreases at all the prices. So these two factors are about shift in demand curve, rightwards or leftwards. So this was the case of change in demand and not the change in quantity demanded. Now let us move further. Yes, we are again discussing the change in quantity demanded versus a change in demand. As we already discussed, a change in quantity demanded is caused by the price change only and some movement along the demand curve, while changes due to other factors other than the price, such as income, taste, expectation, etc., there will be a shift in entire demand curve. It could be inwards or outwards. Outwards is rightwards, inwards is leftwards, which is referred to as change in demand. This also signifies the same thing. Movement along is quantity demanded change, and shifting of demand curve means the change in demand. The first is due to the price change and second is due to some other factor. Now let us look at the case. The question says, consumer began purchasing more of a product due to decrease in the price. So this is the typical case of change in quantity demanded, which is responding to a decrease in price. So it says if there is a decrease in price, we are moving along the curve downwards from this to this. So quantity demanded increases. So this was the case. Now let us look at the another important concept, which is supply. This represents the supply function, which is function of different other factors. For example, the price, the cost, etc. This function is basically representing the seller's behavior and his supplying decision, how the price is affecting the supply decision of the consumer. If the supplier is getting more price, he might be willing to produce more. And if the price given by the market to the supplier is less, the supplier might be giving less products to the market. So clearly it becomes a positively sloped curve. Let us plot it. It will be something like this. It is a positively sloped curve, supply curve. Again, on the vertical axis, we are going to have the price, and on the x-axis, horizontal axis, we are going to have the quantity supplied. So suppose at price P1, the consumer are provided by the suppliers with Q1 quantity. If the price rises, the companies will be able to supply more product, quantity Q2. So for higher price, higher quantity, direct relationship, positively sloped curve. Since the higher price gives us more incentive to supply more quantity, it increases the profit and sales revenue. And on the other hand, if the price of goods fall, the supply falls as well, because the producers do not have sufficient incentive to produce more. So there is a direct relationship or positively sloped curve. If we look at this curve, this is upward sloping, which also indicates that law of supply says this general tendency for the marginal cost of a company for producing a good increases as the quantity produced increases. For higher number of products, the marginal cost is going to be higher. So the supply curve is also a minimum supply price curve. So the higher is the quantity produced, the higher is the price that a firm must be offered so that it is willing to produce that quantity. So the quantity is higher, the price is higher. At higher price, firm will be willing to make more products. Now let us move to the next slide. Here we are talking about a change in supply. Again, same as demand, there are two factors. One is quantity supply . This changes due to change in price. And the second, change in supply itself. So changes due to some other factors than the price will affect the supply. These factors could include the prices of productive resources, the expectations about the future price, the number of suppliers, taxes, or change in some regulation. So these factors are basically affecting the opportunity cost of supplying a good. And when we talk about a single supply curve, all these factors are held constant. So when we know that the factors which are driving a supply curve themselves are changing, the supply curve shifts. For example, is it shifting from S1 to S2. Whereas the change in quantity supplied means we are talking about the effect of price change on the same supply curve. So that is the basic difference. Let us look at the change in quantity supplied versus change in supply. The quantity supplied is the amount that producers plan to sell during a given time period at a particular price, right? And the change in this quantity supplied will be given by change in prices on the same supply curve, and all other factors are assumed to be constant when we are talking about one single supply curve. As we know, price is just one of the factors that affect the supply decision. So this supply curve is basically isolating the impact of everything else because we are assuming that is constant. So all other factors are same. We are only noticing the impact of price on the quantity supplied while we are talking about a single supply curve. So a change in quantity supplied is caused by price change only, movement along the same supply curve. But when one of the factors that is influencing the selling plans changes, the supply curve is shifting. There is a change in supply itself. Now let us move to the next concept. We are talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So aggregate demand curve is simply a schedule that is the net sum of all the amounts of product that all the buyers collectively desire to purchase at one particular price. Similarly, when we talk about aggregate supply curve, it is the aggregate of all the supply curves for all the producers. It is total amount of product that all firms will produce at a given price level. So by aggregate demand and aggregate supply, we understand overall demand and supply in the market. Now let us see how do we reach equilibrium using demand and supply curves. Equilibrium is basically a state in which these conflicting forces of demand and supply are in a balance. So at that level, it is possible for both buyers and sellers to realize their choices simultaneously. For example, this is the demand curve. For consumers at say price 5, they are willing to consume only say 2. At price level of $3, they are willing to consume 7 units, and at a price of 1, they are willing to consume say 10 units. This is their demand curve. At the same time, if we look at the supply curve for companies, they are willing to supply 2 units at the price of $1. And if the price given to them is $3, they are willing to supply 7 units of quantity. And if they are given $5, they are willing to provide 10 units of quantity. So there is a conflict between two forces of demand and supply. But if we notice at this particular point, at the level of $3 price, the consumers are willing to consume 7 units of quantity, and the suppliers are willing to produce 7 units of product. So their objectives are meeting at this point, which is known as equilibrium. So at this point, the choices of both buyers and sellers are realizing simultaneously. So as we notice that the equilibrium price, if we draw a vertical line, we'll get the quantity. If we draw a horizontal line, we'll get a price. So at this equilibrium quantity, we know that demand and supply are meeting. There is no surplus or no shortage. We call surplus when there is excess supply than the demand. We call a shortage when there is excess demand than supply. And at the equilibrium, the quantity demanded and quantity supplied is same. No shortage, there's no so there is neither surplus nor shortage at the equilibrium level. So there is no pressure on the price downward or upward for a change because it is an equilibrium level. Let us see how a pressure is created. Take this example. Suppose P2 is the level of equilibrium where the demands and the supplies are meeting. At this quantity, the consumers are ready to consume at this price, and this quantity, the suppliers are ready to produce at this particular price. Now let us take a case where the price is P1. We know at this price the quantity demanded is going to be Q1D and the quantity supplied will be, this is Q1S. We clearly see there is a huge difference between the quantity which is supplied and the quantity which is demanded. So there is a surplus in the market. The suppliers are supplying more than the consumers are willing to consume. So the difference is surplus. Now due to this surplus, there will be a pressure on the sellers because they will not be able to sell their product completely at this prices. They will reduce the production or they will decrease the quantity supplied, and they will also decrease the price so that they will reach a level of P2 price and Q quantity, which is the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. Similarly, if we talk about another price level P3, so here we know that the quantity supplied is Q3S and the quantity demanded is Q3D. Clearly, the quantity demanded is much higher than the quantity supplied. So this is the case of shortage. Again, it will create an upward pressure on the price. Since the demand is much higher but the supply is not there, the consumers will be forced to consume less, and since their demand is not meeting, they will be willing to pay slightly higher price. So an upward pressure is created on the price and quantity in the case of shortage. Now let us move to the next slide. We are restating that the surplus will put downward pressure on the prices, since the producers will begin to lower their prices because they have excess, they have surplus quantity, they are not being able to sell, they will reduce their prices. Similarly, in the case of shortage, there will be upward pressure on the prices. So for surplus, the prices will fall, the quantity supplied will decrease, and the quantity demanded will increase until the equilibrium level is restored. So this is called equilibrium. So the cases where the state of equilibrium is re-achieved after the changes are introduced due to some external events, that is called stable equilibrium. But when the price is disturbed away and it is not able to converge to the earlier level, it is unstable equilibrium. So for stable, the price should be able to converge back to the equilibrium level. And the unstable equilibrium is where it is not restored after being disrupted by an external force. So generally, on all these demand and supply curves, we notice a stable equilibrium. But there will be some cases where we study unstable equilibrium. Now let us look at these graphs of stable and unstable equilibrium. These are two cases where the equilibrium was stable. In the case of stability, the excess pressure is introduced in order to achieve equilibrium once again. So pressure will be towards the equilibrium point. So excess supply will push the price downwards and excess demand will push the price upwards. The second case is again the variation of the first case. But even in this case, the pressure is towards the equilibrium point. So this is also stable equilibrium. Now let us look at these two cases where the pressure is outwards. So if there is one small reason due to which the equilibrium is disturbed, the price is changed, quantity is changed, the pressure will be outwards to change it even further in the same direction. So that will be the case of unstable equilibrium. Similarly, the fourth case presents both unstable and stable equilibrium. If the curve is cutting like this is unstable equilibrium, and if it is cutting from the right, it will be stable equilibrium. Now let us move to the next topic.